BRUCAST is back, baby.
This BRUCAST episode is brought to you by the BRUCAST Store. Explore a store filled with awesome goodies from hoodies to t-shirts to mugs. We've got you covered. Stay in style with BRUCAST. Embrace the shock, set the trend. Visit now brew-cast.com/store. Link below.
BRUCAST is back, baby. Feel the rhythm shake. Hear the guitar wailing. Let the music break.
Alright, hi everyone, welcome back to another BRUCAST episode. If it's your first time watching the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening to Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rank the show 5 stars. This will ensure that the podcast is recommended to even more people and allow me to keep doing what I love. BRUCAST also on Instagram, X, and TikTok, where I upload shorts with the highlights of the show. So follow now, BRUCAST on Instagram, X, and TikTok. Links on the description below. Hey there, BRUCAST fans! Are you ready to snag some exclusive BRUCAST merch? We are doing it again. It was a huge success the first time. We're doing another giveaway. If you want to win this exclusive, awesome, beautiful cap, all you have to do is subscribe. It's very simple. Subscribe to our channel, and we're gonna be giving this exclusive cap to one of you. The result will happen at the end of January 2025, and that's it. Just subscribe and you can win this awesome cap. We're going to do it again. We did it once. We're going to do it again and you might be the winner. Just subscribe, guys. It's very easy. To everyone who's participating, good luck. And thank you so much for being such an amazing part of the BRUCAST community. Subscribe. All right. Our guest today is Bruce Chalmer. Bruce Chalmer is a psychologist, couples therapist, and author of Betrayal and Forgiveness. He is known for his practical and compassionate approach to relationships. His formula, be kind, don't panic, and have faith, has guided Dr. Bruce's work for over 3 decades now. All right, Dr. Bruce, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor. So relationships, man, they're hard. They're hard. It's tricky. People are tricky. So first of all, how you became interested in all of this?
You know, I started out, my career has involved a bunch of things before I became a psychologist. I started out actually as a statistician. I kind of fell into that through some work I did in my 20s, and I got interested in that, and I'm sort of an old math guy, and I got interested in research and ended up at the University of Vermont, and I got a master's degree in statistics. And then they didn't have a PhD program in statistics, but I had done my master's work in a very psychological area. So I kind of got interested in psychology through that, ended up getting a PhD in psychology, and then got interested in the clinical side of that later on. So I got my clinical training later on. And how did I get involved, especially in working with couples? You know, I had experienced therapy myself through going through some serious marital issues early on, and experienced what it was like to have a relationship and have the relationship not work out so well. Happy to say for the last 21 years I've been in a relationship that has worked out very well, but that experience showed me through my own experience, it showed me the power of therapy. And I realized, wow, I really want to be helping people that way. I want to be doing that sort of thing. And the more I did therapy, and I used to work with lots of individuals as well as couples, the more I did it, the more I wanted to focus on couples because, in some way, it just felt like, wow, that's where the action is. To be privileged to be helping people dealing with such painful stuff. And yet when I saw them heal, it was so inspiring. And when I say heal, that didn't always mean they stayed together. Sometimes a couple would heal and realize they needed to split up. But either way, when people could come through these really painful relationship issues and feel like, wow, we have both grown as people, and often they would stay together and often they would split up. But either way, it just felt very inspiring. So that's kind of what led me into this work, and I continue to enjoy it, even though I'm in my 70s now and I'm still doing the work, still really loving doing the work.
Wow, that's beautiful and very inspiring. Well, and also, I can only imagine what's more challenging than helping just one person, like helping two people. I would imagine it's even more challenging, right? because you
Yeah,
have the whole, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how among my colleagues, other therapists, there are folks who just love working with couples, as I do, and then there are folks who just wouldn't go near it. It's just
Really?
too, yeah, it's too painful, and I have respect for those people too, because I think they're folks who do better than I did helping individuals. It's just different strokes for different folks, as they say. Not everybody's a good fit for everybody.
I see. What I really like what you said is like you help people heal, and it can be the case that they're just not meant to each other. And you said it like in a very accepting ways, like yeah, it's just natural. And it was a little bit how to say surprising for me, because when the first thing that I imagine when I think about couples therapy is like how we can make it work. How can we make those two people come together and stay in this relationship together? And that's not what you said. I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And so my follow-up question would be, how often does this happen? How often do couples they need to split up actually in order to heal?
I don't keep track of that. And I do that. I kind of, I'm an old statistician. It's not that I'm afraid of keeping statistics. I don't view success that way. So that's not what I'm looking to keep track of. I've seen people advertise, like therapists or coaches advertising, oh, we have a 87% success rate, meaning 87% of their couples stay together. I am highly suspicious of that kind of statistic, because the fact of people staying together, as we were saying, that isn't always necessarily an outcome that represents healing. I will note, I do have a bias in this work. It's not that I'm free of bias. I like it when people stay together. I feel that feels more like a success to me. And when they split up, it's sad. It's almost always sad and involves some pain when people are splitting up. But I don't keep track of like what proportion of the couples I work with stay together, because first of all, the people who do, again, this is the old statistician in me, the people who will advertise, their 87% success rate, they're already rather selective about which couples they accept, who they're willing to work with. It's those statistics are just not really valid for much. So but the short answer is no, I don't keep track of that. I'm much more interested in evaluating with everybody I'm working with all the time, is this helping? In fact, the very first question I ask people once we've done the little intro stuff about here's how confidentiality works and the rules around that, the very first question I ask people in a session is, how will you know if this is helping? And I focus them right from the get-go on, it is your right and your responsibility to decide, is this work actually helping you? And what gets interesting, that's another way, another complication in evaluating, is the work successful or not? I've worked with couples, when I'm working with a couple, there are three human beings involved. There's me and there's the two folks. And we may have three different opinions about whether it's helping. And I recognize my opinion shouldn't be the one that counts. It's their opinion, but they may have two different opinions about that. I've worked with couples where one has said, wow, this is just what we needed. And the other has said, oh, this is awful. Usually that's one of those couples where the one who said this is just what we needed is realizing, yeah, I realize we need to split up, and the other person's not happy about it. Who's right about was the work successful? They're both right, even though they have opposite answers. So it's that's a complicated thing. I will seize this opportunity to put in a plug for one of my books. In fact, I have a prop. I can hold it up over here. That the second of my 3 therapy books is called "It's Not About Communication: Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy Is Wrong." And in this book, I mean, and I know you might want to ask me about that kind of weird title, but in this book there is a chapter where I discuss how do you evaluate whether it's successful or not, and go into a lot of those complications. I have another chapter in that book where I outline the way my first sessions tend to go. That's the only session that I do with folks that's pretty prescribed. I have pretty prescribed structure for the first session. After that, it's improv. But up until then, it's pretty prescribed, and I talk about that in that book as well.
I see. Well, how would you say most couples or most partners within those relationships define success within couples therapy?
Yeah. Well, certainly if they're coming in hopes that they will both feel good about staying together. That would be a definition of success. If they both end up feeling good about staying together, and they, or just even, sometimes I'll work with couples where they both are saying, no, we do not perceive the option of splitting up, just not available to us. It would be too difficult. We don't want to do that. What we want to end up is feeling good about each other. We want to feel connected again. We want our sex life to be good again, if it ever was. We want to feel like we can have a conversation about something and not get into an argument, 3 seconds in. That kind of stuff. Those are often measures of success.
Okay, and it also helps you kind of know where you're going or try to help them. So it's very smart. So I really like that you brought up that it's not about communication, which for me is mind blowing. My whole life, every time that I heard like, oh, they're having a couple of problems, they need to figure it out, they need to talk more, they need to communicate more, they need to go through couples therapy to talk about it. So, and then you come with this bomb, like it's not about communication. What do you mean by that, Dr. Bruce?
Yeah, well, of course, I chose the title to be deliberately somewhat provocative, for the very reasons you said, right? It's like, of course, everybody, I mean, maybe not everybody, but a large proportion of the couples who consult me in the first session, when I'm saying, how will you know if this is helping? And they're talking about what they want to see get better. And they're often saying, we need to communicate better. We don't communicate well. Every time we communicate, things go wrong. And of course, that's true. I'm not saying, oh, that's silly. It's not silly.
Okay.
Having said that, there's a reason why I'm saying, yeah, but your problem almost always is not about communication. So let me explain what I mean by that. I say almost always. Every once in a while, I will meet a couple where there really is a communication problem. Now, what's a communications problem? Well, for example, something as simple as literally not speaking the same language. I have met couples where, of course, if they're talking to me, my language is English. And so we're having a session in English. So obviously they both speak English to some extent, but perhaps one of them has a very limited amount of English. They met and got together and they just don't speak the same language, literally. And so that's actually a communications problem. And of course, associated with that, often cultural differences are fascinating in terms of how they create communication issues, because the same action or the same way of expressing something might have vastly different meanings in two different cultures. So there's that. Those are communications issues often. And then the other category of folks where occasionally there are genuine communications issues are where one or the other is somewhere on the autistic spectrum. They used to have the term Asperger's syndrome. The psychiatrists decided to do away with that term because it was a little bit too vague. But there are folks who are very high functioning in general, but, for example, may not be able to tell very accurately whether their partner is happy with them or angry at them or whatever. And that's a communication issue if somebody's on the spectrum, because they often have difficulty interpreting their partner's, emotions. And so that can be difficult. Those are communications issues. The vast majority of people I work with, it's not about communication. I'll tell you why I say that. They're very skilled at communicating. They think they need communication skills. And so they want to say, can't you give us some rules for how we should have a better argument or how we should talk about something that we disagree about? Generally speaking, they don't need rules. They already know that stuff. The problem isn't how they're communicating. The problem isn't that they need more skill at communicating. They're very skilled at communicating just how pissed off they are. They're very skilled at communicating just how contemptuous they are of each other. They're very skilled at communicating just how little they trust each other. In other words, the problem isn't how they're communicating. The problem is what they're communicating. And that has nothing to do with rules for communication. And, therapists will often, because we want to give people help. Of course we do. And it's well-intentioned. We'll often try and teach people rules. It's like, well, have you looked into nonviolent communication? There's all kinds of websites on NVC. It's got its own acronym, nonviolent communication, which is lovely stuff. It's all a bunch of really good ideas. But if you focus on that, it's often a way of avoiding actually what the problem is, which is how pissed off you are at each other. And I'm not saying the way to handle being pissed off at each other is to yell at each other. That doesn't get you anywhere. The problem with being pissed off at each other is you have to figure out how to communicate and not be so pissed off so you can actually hear each other. And that's a very different set of issues than how to communicate. So really the issue for people that I try to lead them toward isn't about learning better communication skills, because they already have those. The issue is actually how to tolerate the anxiety of being honest with each other. And that's the word I use for that is intimacy. And that's one of the things I talk about with everybody in a first session. It's one of my little, structures I have in a first session is I always give them a little mini lecture about the two needs we're all trying to fulfill by being in a relationship. And the reason I divide them into two needs is that the skills you need for one are very different from the skills you need for the other. And these two needs are stability and intimacy. And they're both needs. They're both really important. But the skills you need for stability are about avoiding anxiety. It's like, try not to rock the boat too much. And the skills you need for intimacy are all about tolerating anxiety. Because to be honest with someone, you may say something that they're not going to like, but it's important to say. And you have to tolerate that anxiety without crossing over into panic. I just said a mouthful there, but feel free to ask.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. So the biggest enemy of relationships is not communication issues, because I'm just see if I understood everything correct. It's because they very often communicate, or maybe communicated even too much in an aggressive way. And so the communication might not be the biggest problem most of the times, but anxiety on not having stability, or not having intimacy. And because of this anxiety, they express themselves in a bad manner. So did I got it more or less correct?
Yeah, right on. And the problem, I would claim the problem isn't anxiety per se, which is a given. You care about someone and you're going to say something, something as simple as a garden variety complaint. You just want to complain about something to your partner. You just want to say, hey, would you mind picking up your clothes and putting it in the hamper instead of leaving it on the floor? Something as simple as that. To say that to your partner is not going to be delightful for them to hear. It's going to raise anxiety a little. When a couple is doing well, they can tolerate that. They can say, you know what, there's room for me to be a little annoying here. I know it's a little annoying, but please, would you do that? And the other partner can say, oh my God, yeah, I'm sorry. And yeah, I get it. I'm happy. When things are going well, there's room to issue a complaint and it doesn't cause a disaster. When things are not going well, just a simple complaint pushes people into panic. Oh, there you go again. You're constantly complaining about everything I do. I can't do anything right. This is yet more example of how screwed up we are. And when they can't tolerate that anxiety because there's been too much of it, that's when they're not able to actually have conversations about things that are important. And so that shuts down intimacy.
Wow.
So you're right on. Anxiety is really, you can't get rid of anxiety, but you can either tolerate it or not. And often people find it intolerable because it's been too painful for too long.
Wow. This is really eye-opening. But I do wonder if there's anything else more besides anxiety. And why I mean that, like when you start a new relationship, you have met a new partner, and just like you have the, how should they call, the honeymoon phase at the beginning, right? Like anything can happen and you're okay, like because you are in this honeymoon phase. So I feel like there's something else, because I think over time, as I understand, after certain periods of certain amount of months, I think 7 months, I don't know, it depends, I think varies depending on the couple. You correct me if I'm correctly, if I'm wrong, but then this phase ends, and then the real couple start to show up, and then there can be conflicts and stuff like that. And I feel like anxiety being there or not, it's kind of doesn't, what I mean? Like I feel like there's something else besides just anxiety that.
Oh yeah.
So what would be those things?
Yeah, there are, of course. I mean, it's not just only anxiety per se, it's what goes along with it. As to what, when I was saying, the issue is how much you can tolerate the anxiety, that's associated with a lot of the stuff you're talking about. So early on in a relationship, really all you have early on in a relationship is a bunch of illusions. Oh. And I don't mean that in a cynical way. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's all you got. You barely know somebody. So you're projecting onto them all kinds of wonderful things, which is lovely. It feels wonderful that, that early phase where everything when you fall in love with someone, everything they do is just incredible. And, if it's different from you, you just discover that it's this new discovery. And if it fits with you, you just feel this wonderful sense of, oh, I finally found someone who gets me and who I get him or her. And it's just beautiful. That's all lovely. And so that covers up a lot of differences that just don't amount to anything when you're in that phase. And it's true, over time, that phase tends to change. There are folks who even talk about different hormones being involved in early love than in later love. Some of those early kind of, limerence is the term that somebody coined to describe that feeling of being like deeply in love and sort of blind to everything else, and that over time, that fades with actual experience. What you start to discover is the real person rather than just the illusions you have about them. And I say real person. And look, one of my favorite things to note, and I'll give a shout out to Jill Bolte Taylor. I don't know if you know that name. She is a neuroscientist who did the very first viral TED Talk. It wasn't the first TED Talk of all TED Talks. It was like the 8th or something, but it was the first one that went viral. Her middle name is yeah, there it is. You got it. Exactly. Jill Bolte Taylor. She's a neuroscientist who had, at a relatively young age, in her 30s, a massive left hemisphere hemorrhagic stroke. And it wiped out a lot of her left hemisphere functions for years. And she wrote about that after she recovered her function. She wrote about that in a book called My Stroke of Insight. And the reason I'm referring to in this context is a later book she wrote. The second book she wrote is called Whole Brain Living. And her basic thesis, and she writes about it in a very funny way. She's a kind of whimsical writer. Her basic thesis is we are all at least 4 different people.
What?
And I love noticing that, It's like we're all at least 4 different. It's funny. I was talking to my wife about this when I was reading the book, and she hadn't read the book, but I was talking to her about it and saying, wow, I really find that an interesting concept. And one of the things Jill Bolte Taylor says is you should all name your own 4, give them funny names. So I asked my wife, explain the concept. I said, what would you name your 4 people? She immediately said, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Of course, that's we're boomers. That's a reference that a lot of folks wouldn't necessarily get, but that's the Beatles. Anyway, the point being, if you realize that being, when you're getting to know somebody, when I say, you start to get to know the real person isn't always consistent, whereas that's what Jill Bolte Taylor points out. Well, there's at least 4 different people in there that you see different people at different times, but they're all active at various times. It's just one or the other one is apt to be more of the 4. Only one of the 4 is the one that panics. The other 3 have different, orientations. And, Jill Bolte Taylor's idea is we should all learn to get our 4 parts together so we can kind of take care of each other. So especially the one that's freaking I'm not sure what's your language code here. Can I say an F-bomb? I'm not sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, good. Yeah, freaking the fuck out. That's what I was saying. It's only one part that's freaking the fuck out. The other parts, have different takes on things. One of them is very logical. One of them is very just wants to have fun. One of them is very holistic and in touch with everything, And then there's that one that panics anytime anything seems vaguely dangerous. And when that one comes to the fore, it's awfully difficult to talk. And a lot of times what happens is people get into panic mode and then they can't hear each other. They can't even hear themselves. But getting back to your point, in the honeymoon phase, you don't see a lot of panic because people are just so enthralled with each other. They don't observe the differences as difficult. But over time, you keep encountering things that, this person that you love and you're so in love with also turns out to be different from you. Of course, nobody's attracted to somebody who's a clone of themselves. They're attracted in part to the differences. And those differences also come along with some things that are annoying as well as wonderful. That's the human condition. So over time, people start experiencing that sense of annoyance, and how they manage that in part determines how they're going to go. If they can be okay with that. And even, when a couple is doing really, really well, those annoyances are just funny. They're there, but they're just funny. Nobody cares about it really. You learn to live with it. When a couple isn't going well, any one of those annoyances is just further evidence of how angry they should be with each other.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
so interesting. And so, would it be safe to say that after you've been in a relationship for a while and you know all of those four different persons that exist inside of your partner, and you accept them, you just accept them. This is my part. Would you say that's true love?
That's a good way of saying it. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but I almost never. I hate to say never, but I can't think of a time. I don't question people's love for each other. Do you know what I mean? If people are loving each other, that is true. Sometimes it turns out that people who love each other simply aren't okay with each other. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't say that isn't true love. I can tell you a little bit of my personal history that's relevant here, because I mentioned, I'm in a second marriage. The short story of my first marriage is that both my ex and I went on to marry really wonderful women, and we're both a lot happier. That's the short story of my first marriage. And my ex is a wonderful person, but clearly it turned out, and it took us a long time to figure that out. Took her a long time to figure that out. Turned out we weren't suited to each other in some very important ways. Both good people. We both loved each other, but clearly it wasn't going to work because there was a deal breaker there. And that is often true, folks. So again, true love, I think we had true love, but it wasn't the kind of love that was going to make a marriage last. So that I certainly think the idea of continuing to love someone, even when you know all of those different aspects of them, even when you've experienced those various annoyances, that certainly is lasting love. I would certainly agree with that.
That's a very nice way of putting lasting love, which I would interpret as healthy love. If you have something that is lasting, it's durable, like it's healthy, because the opposite is unhealthy. Anyway, I heard it once, and please correct me, that no one will ever find the perfect partner. That doesn't exist. You just will find someone that that have one of those persons inside that you don't get along very well, but you just accept it. You won't find someone that is 100% compatible with you. There's always gonna be something there, but you're just gonna accept it.
Yeah. The perfect person wouldn't really be perfect. It would be boring.
Oh,
I just don't think it would work. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I can't think of the guy who wrote this article a few years ago, who was basically talking about how I think it was a book that went along with it. I didn't read the book, but I read the article. It was in the New York Times, and it was why you will pick the wrong person. And it wasn't cynical about it. It basically was saying what you're saying. He was saying, you know what? When you pick a person, you're picking which annoyances you're going to have to tolerate.
exactly. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
Who is this gentleman? Do you remember who's wrote that?
I can't think of the name right now. No.
Yeah, it's okay. So yeah, it sounds to be true. I feel like it's true. And Dr. Bruce, I wanted to ask you, so we were talking about hormones, different types of hormones and lasting love. And you mentioned very briefly that there's some types of hormones that happens later as your marriage. So later love hormones. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'm not enough of a biologist or neuroscientist or any of that stuff. I can't just name them. There are folks that say, well, there's vasopressin involved, and there's dopamine involved, and there's a bunch of hormones involved. I don't remember which is which, but it does seem to be that when people get into the kind of love that really lasts, which is, you could call it companionate love, as opposed to just sort of infatuation. And I want to add something to that, because sometimes people think that intense, passionate, erotic sort of connection, sometimes people think, oh, that has to go away. And actually it doesn't. There are folks who are married for a very long time that maintain a really strong erotic charge between them. So the erotic stuff doesn't have to go away either.
I think we're back. I'm sorry, Dr. Bruce. Give me a second. I'm just gonna put you on the thing again. 3, 2. I think we're back. Hi, can you say something?
Yes, testing 1, 2, 3. I think we're back.
All right. Sorry, everyone. That's what happens. Live shows. We're back. Sorry, Dr. Bruce. So we were talking about lasting love.
Yeah, yeah. Just that fact that lasting love doesn't have to mean the loss of the erotic connection. That can be very strong as well. But again, I think there are, as I say, the folks who would really understand this, the sort of neuroscientist types would say, yeah, it involves different hormones, but they're very powerful.
Let me look it up. It sounds very interesting. Love hormones at later stage of marriage. Let's see what that pops up.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, oxytocin, of course. Yeah.
oxytocin, known as the love hormone, provokes feelings of contentment, calmness, and security, which are often associated with mate bonding. Vasopressin
Yeah.
is linked to behavior that produce long-term monogamous relationship. Wow, that's so interesting. I had no idea about that. I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and he was sharing with me. He's not a doctor. He's he's a DJ. So he was sharing with me. He's like, I have this theory that everyone in any kind of relationship just fell out of love over time. And it's up to you to maintain a romantic relationship. Otherwise, it won't last. It's just like something you need to do in order to help it survive. And would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that the one thing people will often say is, well, it takes work,
Oh,
And I've heard that, and I, in the very sense you were just describing, it's like, yeah, you have to give some conscious effort to that, or it might slip away. It's funny because I don't like to think of it in terms of it taking work in the sense of unpleasant work. It takes conscious effort, but when you're doing something you love, for most people, I guess it's kind of a definition of doing something you love. When you're doing something, you have a lot of fun. I'm just any kind of activity, I love to do X, Y, or Z, that usually means it's not hard work to put in the effort to make time to do that. It feels like a reward. And when a relationship is going well, the work of nurturing it feels like its own reward. It just feels good. You keep getting these positive vibes back from your partner, and your partner keeps getting positive vibes back from you. It's self-reinforcing. So it doesn't feel like hard work. It just feels like joy.
yeah.
But I think what your friend was pointing out is very true. That it's a couple that is doing well. Here's another one of my favorite themes here. If you look at how couples are doing well, this applies to communication, by the way, too. If you look at a couple that is doing well, they will be doing things in certain characteristic ways. The stuff we've just been talking about. You'll see that they are making romantic gestures toward each other, usually. You'll see that they are communicating in ways that are mutually respectful. You'll see that they can handle disagreements gracefully. You'll see they can handle disappointments gracefully. Couples that do well are doing that. And there's a guy named John Gottman who you may have heard of because he's really well known. Anytime people are talking about couples therapy, they will often mention John Gottman's work because he's a researcher out in Seattle in the United States and in the state of Washington. And he's been studying couples for decades now. I think he's well into his 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And his most famous research involved bringing in newlywed couples, interviewing them separately and together. And one of the things he would do is bring them into the same room and ask them to talk about something they disagree about. And he would, of course, videotape this conversation. So he followed those same couples, would bring them in every few years for, in some cases, like 25 years. What do you do if you follow a bunch of couples for 25 years? Well, you're going to discover some of them broke up. Some of them are still together and happy about it. Some of them are still together, but not so happy about it. Well, then he would go back and look at the newlywed data. What do we see in the newlywed data that might have predicted how they turned out? And he's a real kind of, nerdy statistical type guy like me, which I can kind of relate to that. I'm an old nerdy statistical guy myself. And so he just let the data speak for itself. He said, well, all right, let's see what these groups look like in terms of those videotape conversations. And he discovered a number of things. And one of the things that what called it to mind in terms of what we were just talking about is one of the things he discovered was it didn't make any difference how many differences they had going in. In other words, there were couples that had lots of differences going in that did well or split up. There were couples that had few differences going in that did well or split up. That doesn't seem to make any difference. What did make a difference, and this part isn't terribly surprising, what did make a difference is how they handled those differences. And when he looked at those conversations in the newlyweds, how they talked about those differences was very predictive about how they were going to turn out later on. As newlyweds, the couples, it was interesting, the gender differences he found among heterosexual couples. He found that in the heterosexual couples that he was studying, the large majority of the time, it was the woman who brought up the problem to be talked about. Usually, I think it was like 80%, that didn't differentiate between and how they turned out at all. That was true across the board. Not that surprising, because it's usually in a heterosexual couple, women want to talk about stuff before men do. That's more or less, again, it's not 100%, but, more or less, that's the tendency. So that didn't predict anything. But how she brought up the problem was highly predictive of how the couple was going to do. If she brought up the problem by tearing him a new one, in other words, if she was pissed off before she even got started, they were in trouble. If she was respectful in how she brought it up, she didn't have to be wimpy about it. She could be assertive. But if she was clear and respectful, if she's saying, well, there is something I want to bring up. It's not the end of the world, but there's something I'd like to bring up. You open to that? That predicted success. Now, it wasn't, of course, only up to the woman, because what dovetails neatly with that was the other thing he found. The couples that did well, the man frequently accepted influence from the woman. What did he mean by that? He just meant that when she brought up the problem, he showed clearly he wanted to hear it. He was open to hearing it. Didn't mean he agreed with her. He wasn't saying, yes, dear. That can be kind of condescending. It wasn't that. It was just that if she said, hey, there's a problem I want to discuss, he was saying, absolutely, I want to hear. And he genuinely listened. That was predictive of success. And you can see how those two things fit together so nicely, because if her habitual experience of him is that he listens when she brings something up, she's not pissed off when she starts. She's confident when she starts. She can be respectful and confident because she says, well, he's going to listen, so we'll get someplace. If, on the other hand, he stonewalls or puts her down or, just doesn't want to listen, then she's pissed off before she starts and they're in trouble. So all of those things have to do with how a couple is doing when they're doing well. Now, this is the part that I touched on in that book. It's not about communication. What do therapists do with this information? Well, they'll say, oh, good, let's look at how couples that are doing well communicate, and then tell people to communicate like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Except that it's a logical fallacy.
Oh, no.
And I love pointing this out, right? So you play tennis. I mean, I hardly ever play tennis, but I used to with my kids long ago. You know what tennis is, obviously. You've seen tennis, right? Yep. Ever see
I know tennis.
Rafa, ever see Rafa play tennis? I guess he just recently retired, didn't he? Rafael Nadal. And he, among many other pros, when he hits the ball, he grunts loudly. He does this big loud grunt when he hits the ball, right?
Yeah.
Most of the pros seem to do that. So what this tells me is that I, as a not a very skilled tennis player, if I just grunt loudly, I'll be a good tennis player, right?
I guess. I mean, no, of course not. It doesn't make any difference. You need a technique.
No.
Yeah.
No, imitating how the good ones do it will not make me a good tennis player. I actually have to be a good tennis player, and then maybe grunting will help some.
Yeah, no, the grunting doesn't make any difference. I mean, it's his thing, but I heard like it helps you with like releasing it. But at the end of the day, you need the technique. That's the thing.
Exactly. The point I'm making is just imitating how the good ones do it doesn't necessarily address the problem. If the underlying the problem is, if I learn how to communicate in ways that sound respectful, but inside I'm still really pissed off and hating my partner, I can sound as respectful as I want to pretend to be, and it's going to come out pissed off. You can't hide that. People are going to pick that up. And so all the communications rules, maybe you've heard of some of my favorites. And look, these aren't bad ideas, but it's just that if you focus on those rules, it doesn't get you anyplace. I statements. You ever hear of I statements as opposed to you statements? Say this is how I feel as opposed to this is what you're doing. That's, you're a bad person for doing this. No, it's like when you do that, it makes me feel X, Y, and Z, whatever. If I'm pissed off, I'm going to sound pissed off, even if I do a well-crafted I statement. Or active listening, make sure you hear what the other person said and kind of check with them that you've understood it. That's not a bad idea. That's what a well-functioning couple is apt to do. But doing that when you're pissed off at your partner will not make the conversation go any better. you're still pissed off. You're still going to be contemptuous or angry or closed. So you're still going to convey your lack of trust, and conveying your lack of trust in good language still conveys lack of trust. So that fallacy of saying, well, if we could just imitate how a well-functioning couple behaves, we're not going to get to the point. We have to get to why they're not well-functioning. And John Gottman points that out himself, which I note in one of his books. He talks about that. It's that logical fallacy that, he gave a great example in one of his books. He said there's research that says that when couples laugh a lot, they are doing better. Couples that are doing well laugh a lot. If you instruct people to laugh a lot during their fights, it doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't make them function any better. You can't laugh a lot on purpose when you're pissed off. You can fake laughing a lot and it won't get you anywhere. The reason couples that do well laugh a lot are because they're doing well, not because they're laughing a lot. If you're doing well, you're apt to be happy and you're going to be prone to laughing.
I see. But Dr.
So don't focus on the laughing, focus on the doing well.
But Dr. Bruce, I feel like there's no exit now, because you need couples to know how to talk to each other, but it's not possible to have them talking nicely and properly to each other if they're anxious and if they're angry and there's no trust. So first you need to get rid of this anger and rebuild trust. Like where do we go from there? How do we get back to the point where they are able to talk with I statements, where they know how to point out their differences in a calm way? How do you come back to this?
Absolutely. Well, so what that introduces is, and you mentioned it in the intro, my little 7-word formula.
Oh. Be
kind, don't panic, and have faith. Let me explain each of the 3 parts of that, because that's exactly what it's about. And it's an oversimple formula. It's like, that's not your cure for everything, but it's a way of summarizing one way to think about it. The be kind part, and I don't just mean be kind in the sense of be nice to each other, although of course we should all be nice to each other if we can. I mean, be kind in the sense of kinship. Feel like you are kin to that person. You're in the same family. You're in the same tribe. You're on the same team. When people feel like that, they want to stay together. And they cut each other all kinds of slack when they feel like that. Well, you can't feel kind when you're in a panic. And the panic part, that's what I was talking about earlier. Like, if you don't tolerate the anxiety, if you cross into panic, you can't hear anything anymore. Whole chunks of brain shut down. You're just doing with that, one of those 4 people that Jill Bolte Taylor talks about. It, you're just dealing with the one that's panicking. And you can't have a conversation with somebody in a panic. So you can't even think clearly when somebody's in a panic. So the don't panic is so that you can be kind. And the part we're getting to now, exactly what you said, it's like, well, great. Where does that leave us? If I'm saying that, all the rules in the world won't do any good if you're panicking, obviously you have to not panic. So, my original formula was just 5 words. It was just be kind and don't panic. But people would then say, quite as much as you did, it's in effect, you're saying, well, great. How do you not panic? Where does that leave us? Just saying don't panic doesn't help. So that's how I added the last bit, and have faith. What do I mean by faith? Faith, the way I'm defining faith, when you have faith, that is what helps you not panic. So what do I mean by faith? First of all, what do I not mean by faith? I'm not talking necessarily about religious faith. I'm not talking about belief in God as Western religions define God or whatever. I'm not saying you can't have that. I'm just saying I'm defining faith much more broadly than that. The way I define faith is when you accept that reality, for all of its pain and difficulty and confusion and everything else, that it's nevertheless right to be what it is. There's a rightness about how everything works, even when it sucks, even when we've been hurt by it. Underlying all of that, underlying that experience of hurt, there's something that seemed to need to go on, even when we can't understand that. That's what I mean by faith. And, I'll throw in my most recent book, which is, I love to talk about too, Betrayal and Forgiveness. Betrayal is a great example of that. It's like, oh my God, somebody betrays you, which is to say you are badly, badly hurt by someone you trusted. That's an awful experience. Lots of the folks I work with are dealing with that experience, that betrayal in couples. I mean, it's close to half probably of the couples that I work with are dealing with some kind of infidelity. It's really, really common. That's a betrayal, for most people. If their deal with each other was monogamy, that's a betrayal. And there's lots of other kinds of betrayal that happen as well. That's really, really difficult. How do you recover from that? Well, among other things, you have to find some, the couples that come in with some sense that, okay, this happened. It's horrible that it happened. The person that was cheated on is angry and hurt and questioning their own sanity because they didn't figure it out before, and all that sort of stuff's going on. The person that did the cheating, usually by the time they get to therapy, is feeling guilty and hurt and, feeling like they're just a piece of shit. And, how do you get past that? The couples that can get to some sense of faith that would say, you shouldn't have done that, but we're both valid people here. There must be some basis that explains this, that we can wrap our brains around, and maybe we can heal from this. And sometimes healing involves splitting up, and sometimes healing involves learning and staying together and having a better relationship than they had before. But that's what I mean by faith. The couples that have that sense of, wow, the one thing we know is that we can't go back to how it was before. The couples that come in saying, where the cheater is saying, oh my God, I'll never do it again. I'm just terrible, and the other person saying, you're damn right. And that's it. And, we should go back to how it was. That they're not exemplifying faith. They're not accepting the reality of what happened. They're just trying to deny that it happened. Never works. So faith is, that one word, faith is kind of the answer to your question. All right, how do we get out of this? It's like I'm saying, it's almost like I'm saying you have to already be doing well to do well. And I'm saying, no, the difference is faith. It's like, okay, we're not doing well. I think it's possible that we can do well, although damned if I know how. But I'm going to start with this sense that this whole living business is somehow possible. Even being in a couple is somehow possible. Maybe not us, but maybe us. Start from there and you got a shot. And that's the antidote to panic. It's like, okay, I'm not going to panic about this. I'm just going to have to accept it and figure out what to do. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's one answer.
It does. It's beautiful. And so the antidote to panicking is like having faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
I once heard that trust is like glass. Once you break it, you cannot never like put it back together perfectly. It's like it's gone, or a piece of paper that you like. You have a perfect piece of paper, just destroy it, and then you try to make it like perfect and seamless again. Like you just can't. It's just not one of those things that do not go back. But if I think a little bit from what you told me, like it seems that it's up to the couple to decide if it's something that it can go back or not.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. And you're pointing out something that's really big for folks. You can't go back to thinking it could never happen. You certainly can't go back to thinking it didn't happen. And sometimes people are in denial about that. When somebody's been betrayed in any sort of way, and cheating is a great example of that. When somebody's been betrayed, there's this part of us, and I think it's a survival mechanism. There's part of us that wants to go back and make it not have happened. It's like it's a part of our brains that doesn't understand time. We want to make it go back and prevent it, not merely heal from it, but it's like, no, that couldn't have happened. It must be a bad dream.
It's too painful.
It's too painful, exactly. And the process of accepting that it actually did happen is a very painful process. And yet when someone can get through that enough, that's when they can start seeing, all right, we can't make it, like you said about, the glass being broken. We can't make it so that the glass was never broken. We might be able to forge a new glass that is better than the other one. It's like, it's gonna have the history of that broken glass in it, but maybe we can have such appreciation for the growth we've done to get through that we can actually have a better relationship than we had before. I have seen that with couples. It's really amazing when that happens. Doesn't always happen, but it's inspiring when it does.
Or not. Like it depends on the personal values, right? It depends on the couple. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've met folks where they heal in the sense, I'm thinking of a particular couple I worked with, 5 or 6 years ago, where they really made an enormous amount of progress in understanding what had happened. And it was the man had cheated with someone, had an affair with someone, and the woman was really hurt by this. And they made amazing progress toward mutual understanding. They could see, that's what was going wrong here. But the woman, for all of her understanding, she simply couldn't wrap her brain around being with someone who would have done that to her. She said, I can't think of marriage that way. I can't stay with someone who cheated, even though I can forgive him. I can understand, well, I see where he was coming from. I wish he hadn't done it. It was wrong. But I sort of understand it, but I still can't live with it. And I've met folks where that's the case, and I, of course, respect that.
Got it. Dr. Bruce, we covered very briefly earlier on about sex. So we mentioned sex very, very briefly. So one of the categories that I would like to talk with you is like sex. You mentioned there's sex, there's good sex, and there's sacred sex.
Yes,
So
indeed.
I think it's very universally acceptable that healthy sex life means health marriage. But what more there is to it? Because you mentioned like there's those different types of sex.
Yeah. I define those three different levels, and they are kind of cumulative.
Okay.
And I write about this actually. I'll hold up a prop of my first therapy book, or book on couples, Reigniting the Spark: Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back. There's a shameless plug there. And one of the chapters, that particular one is one of the chapters from that book, Sex, Good Sex, and Sacred Sex. So when I say sex, I mean what I call plain old sex. What is that? Anything you think it is. That's what that is. Anything you put in the general category of sexual activity, that's plain old sex. And, what do you need to have plain old sex? First of all, in talking about what plain old sex is, there are people who were sexually traumatized, had been sexually abused or raped or, have horrible experiences where even plain old sex is difficult or impossible. And to heal from that requires that you process the trauma. And that often requires therapy or, experiences that let you be able to process the trauma so it no longer triggers you, so that you can actually be okay with your own body and your own sexuality and possibly be okay with someone else. So that's, plain old sex is whatever you want to call sex. You need some basic knowledge. What is that? How do you do what, and what goes where, and who does what, and and not just knowledge about what goes where, which is what they tend, at least in the schools that my kids went to in the United States. When they have sex education, it's all focused on, put tab A into slot B, what goes where. They don't talk a lot about the feelings associated with it. They certainly don't talk a lot about pleasure. That's a different thing. But, the basic knowledge is what you need in order to have something of a sex life if it involves even yourself, but certainly someone else as well. So that's all in the plain old sex category. So what do I mean by good sex? Now, there's a lot of different ways people could explain what I mean by good sex. What I mean by good sex is when it's not merely that you're having sex, it's that you are having sex intimately. Now, what do I mean by intimately? I mean, you are present and honest with yourself and each other. In other words, you show up emotionally and physically and spiritually, however you want to call it. You show up together and you're in that moment. That's what I mean by what most people would call that good sex. Not only does it feel good, because plain old sex can feel good too, but it feels good and enhances intimacy. It's an expression of intimacy between the couple. And, it's funny. Sometimes people will say, oh, you mean making love instead of just fucking. And actually, I don't just mean that, because sometimes people can have a resounding fuck that also is intimate. You wouldn't rule that out. You don't have to be politically correct for it to be what I would call good sex. And it's interesting because, power exchange stuff is often plays into what a lot of people define as good sex, the dominant submission type stuff. Again, different strokes for different folks. But that kind of thing can involve a lot of power difference and things like that they play with. And that can be, for some folks, really good sex. So that can be very intimate if that's what they really want to express as their fantasy. So that's what I mean by good sex. It's basically plain old sex where you're actually intimately present with each other. That's what I mean by good sex. Now, what do I mean by sacred sex? Well, sacred sex is another step up. And of course, so really the question is, what do I mean by sacred? Sacred, the Latin term, and it's actually related to the Hebrew word. It's not the same word, but they have similar meanings. The words for holiness in both of those languages mean set apart. Sacredness is when it's not merely about the two of you anymore. Now, folks in the Tantra tradition would talk about, getting in touch with forces that are much bigger and more universal. People in Western religions will talk about being in touch with God through their sex. There's all kinds of different ways of understanding it, but there's something about sacred sex that partakes of the sacred. And of course, lots of things can be sacred that aren't sex. People can do anything in a way that is, in a sense, that is involved with forces just greater than them. It's transcending just themselves. But sex is especially amenable to that because it's so powerful.
But then you're having a threesome. I mean, that's kind of weird. You're involving God into sex. I understand the sacred part. Like, it's something that you cherish and you look forward to, and it's something very special. I mean, you have a sacred moment every morning when I drink my coffee. But I don't feel like I'm involving any God into the mix, anything spiritual. And I think like involving things like this into sex, it's kind of weird.
I mean, it's true. If you personify it too much, and the idea of a threesome is not as a turnoff for a lot of people. That wouldn't be my number one either. But the idea of participating, that you're not merely having sex, you're creating the universe as you do it. That's more of I think a Tantra inspired sort of idea, the idea that you're participating in forces that that are much bigger than all of us. That sense of joining with something much greater, that is a different level of experience than just feeling good. And I'm not knocking feeling good, by the way. Feeling good's great, But, and I want to say, when you're saying you're identifying you're sitting there with coffee as a sacred moment, there is something there. Again, you don't have to talk about an anthropomorphic sort of God, but that is a moment where you are somehow intimate with nature, or intimate with yourself, or intimate with the world. It's a moment. You called it sacred, I think, for a reason. Do you know what I mean? You didn't just say that's a nice moment. You have all kinds of nice moments. No, it's like you set that moment aside and you say, you know what, I'm going to have this as my morning ritual, and I'm going to be really present for it. To me, that's a sense of intimacy, and that's, that is partaking of the sacred in some ways.
Well, Dr. Bruce, that's perfect. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I don't know what else to ask. This is beautiful. So where people can find you, where people can find your work?
Yes, indeed. Well, let me especially put in a plug for my most recent book.
Please.
This one, Betrayal and Forgiveness: How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. It's available anywhere books are sold. You can get it on Amazon, pretty much any place. You can get it in any of three formats. I have a paperback version, the one I was holding, also available for e-readers, either Kindle on the Amazon site, or you can get it for other e-readers and other places. And also the audiobook, which I did the narration of. So I'm especially promoting that. You can get information about any of my stuff, including my books, at my website, which is brucechalmer.com. So just brucechalmer.com does it. And you can get information about the podcast that I do with my wife, Judy Alexander, at the podcast title is Couples Therapy in 7 Words. So what we got for our website, you can actually type that all out, couplestherapyin7words.com, but there's a quicker way, CT in the number 7, ctin7.com will also get you there. And that's, you'll be able to hear all of our podcast episodes. On my blog, I also have videos of all my podcast episodes, or all of the ones we've done. So all of that stuff are ways people can get in touch with me. And also, I do offer telehealth services as well, and information about that is on my website.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. We're going to make sure to leave the links in the description below. Dr. Bruce, do you have any final remarks, anything else that you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
I think we have covered the stuff that I like to talk about, and I really appreciate this. Thanks for doing it.
All right, Dr. Bruce, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much. All right, everyone, you know what? It's giveaway time. If you want to win this awesome cap, just subscribe. As I mentioned before, we are announcing the winner at the end of January 2025. We gave a cap already at last month, so that's the second one. And you can win. It's yours. You can have it. Just subscribe, and you're going to announce the winner at the end of the month. All right, everyone. It has been a pleasure. Again, Dr. Bruce, it was amazing. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
So long.
All right. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. If it's your first time watching the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rank the show 5 stars. This will ensure that the podcast is recommended to even more people and allow me to keep doing what I love. Check out now the BRUCAST store, Explore store, filled with awesome goodies from hoodies to t-shirts to mugs. We've got you covered. Stay in style with BRUCAST. Embrace the shock, set the trend. Buy now at brew-cast.com/store. Again, that's brew-cast.com/store. Link on the description below. Be a BRUCAST model and get free stuff. We'd love to see how you and your loved ones enjoy BRUCAST. Snap a picture of yourself, your family, your friends, or even your pets wearing BRUCAST merch, or watching an episode of the show and send it to us and become part of BRUCAST. We will feature you and your pictures at the end of every episode, just like the ones you're seeing on the screen right now. You can upload your pictures at brew-cast.com/contact or tag us on social media. Alright everyone, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much and see you next time. Bye bye.